Yeah, I don't blame you. So let's see if this live stream works. Six, yeah, okay. Seems to be working.
Yeah, checking the window.
Oh, that means that you.
All right. Good, that's working.
Oh,
Got it.
Oh, that's it.
don't sit on it. Sit on one of your. There she is.
As I walked over, I thought, this might just be Tom and me.
No, we braved the
I
weather.
did, good on ya. Lori and Murray won't be here. Pardon me? Margaret is, oh yes, hello. Well, I figured we'd have people online, but I just wondered
So I just wasn't sure whether Mike was arriving
today.
tonight. I thought he was arriving today.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was tonight.
I spoke with Lori earlier this week and she said they would not. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure. So I probably didn't need to bring the extra chairs in.
Oh, right. And it just occurred to me that I didn't offer Cliff a lift.
Well, I'm aware of that because Cliff has a doctor appointment, so he'll be late anyway, so.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, well, I only just thought about it anyways.
He may or may not show up depending on whether he might take, I sent him an email saying, it'd be quite fine just to stay at home and watch.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Chilly.
All right.
As chilly as it was.
Well, I was sitting still for a long time, barefoot, and so then when I finally got up, I was like, oh man, it's cold. Funny how I didn't notice that. while I was just sitting there.
All right, Margaret, you can hear me okay?
Sure can.
All right.
Yep.
Good.
Maybe I should sit over here if I want to see it. Oh, Jen should sit there. She know.
Doesn't matter.
Whatever, sit yourself, that's right. Thanks, I brought my scarf.
I know, it's October and
Oh,
it's
yeah,
cold,
exactly.
it's not fair. It's not fair.
No, it isn't. There we go.
Spring can be anything.
Waste. You want liquor?
Is it? I believe it.
Already understood us 3 months ago.
Exactly. All right, well, let's get this show on the road. If Cliff shows up, great. So just a quick recap of what we did last time, which was a month ago. We were looking at objections people make to say objections in favor of same-sex relations and homosexuality. And the objections that they make by means of the word. They're saying, well, the writings actually say, the word actually means this. And so we said, well, one objection they say is the writings do not speak about homosexuality. And it's true, you will not word search homosexuality and find that word in the writings because it didn't exist back then. So it doesn't mean they don't talk about the behavior. One is sodomy really about the homosexual action? And that was interesting because there is some biblical scholarship that says sodomy is more about love of self and pride and those things than actual same-sex behaviors. There are other places in the writings where sodomy definitely refers to it. So that one's not a clean yes or no answer. You have to kind of watch what you're reading, I think, to find out what sodomy is really referring to. Some people say homosexual rape is the problem in Sodom and Gomorrah story, not the same sex part of it. And I mean, there's a case to be made for that again, but it ultimately, even if you grant that as being correct, it doesn't mean that other passages in the writings don't speak to the issue of homosexuality. People say, how can homosexuality be adultery? Because there's no breaking of a covenant. There's no marital infidelity within it. But the writings talk about adultery as an unlawful coupling or conjunction, and that's how that is. It's a perversion of order. What makes conjugal love? Some people think of conjugal love as kind of like this special ingredient you put on top of a marriage. Oh, well, you've got a marriage. Oh, but then the conjugal love is even higher than that. And it leads to people saying, oh, well, you can have conjugal love because you have these different things. Oh, you've got monogamy, you've got consent, you've got conjunction. So they say, oh, well, therefore you can have conjugal love. You can have this special thing on top. But that's not what the writings say. It's conjugal love is this union of souls, and it's about marriage. Conjugal love is marriage. It's marriage love. It's not anything beyond that. And so you can't have that between same-sex partners. CL 55 says it very explicitly that there's love between men and men, there's love between men and women, and there's love between women and women. And the same-sex loves are different. And it's just, you can't have the same depth of connection. This one, no harm to self and others. I'm actually gonna talk about that more again today. We touched on it briefly at the end of last session. We were kind of rolling through 6 and 7 pretty quick. I think I have more to say on no harm to self and others. And the last one, though, is sex, gender, and a spectrum. This idea that gender is a spectrum that we see in culture today. The writings say, well, you know, a male is a male, a female is a female, down to their very soul level. You can't change genders. There's no way, there's no case you can make from the writings that gender is a spectrum. It just doesn't exist. So anyway, so that was last time, but today we want to look at some other arguments. And here's what we're looking at today. These are the basic ones that I see people make. Should Old Testament laws be taken literally today? You know, there's a law that says man should not lay with a man as he does a woman. Hey, people are born that way. It's not their fault. You can't blame them for doing these things. How do you deal with that? Looking at the idea of people unable to change I didn't put the screen share on there, did I?
Let's see.
You know, I'm sorry, Margaret, I was supposed to share my screen with you. This might make it easier to follow along. Next time I do something stupid, just somebody tell me, right?
Stupid or not.
I was wondering.
Oh no, that's all right. So people are unable to change, you know, like there's no way that they can change this characteristic. Number 4, love is love. You know, it goes along with this idea of I know an LGBT person, they're so nice, blah, blah. They're not hurting anybody. And then want to finish with the role of conscience and how that plays into this discussion. So that's the direction we're going for the next, hour, give or take. So here we go. Should Old Testament laws be taken literally today? You don't see this case made a lot, but it does get made. And it's worth pointing out because I've seen it on Facebook in particular. Make some snide remark about, oh, well, we don't do the blah blah anymore, so why do we take this seriously?
The cloven hooves and all that.
Yeah, well, they'll pick other ridiculous examples. And so here's how the chapter goes. Lord says to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. So the point here is the Lord starting with a very clear warning, don't be like other nations. I think this is something kind of gets lost in the church today. You know, it used to be about distinctive new churchness, and I don't know how much we do that anymore. You know, we don't make that as a core message. It's we like to plunder from the Egyptians, which you're allowed to do, but we don't want to be like them. But anyway, so don't be like everybody else. And here's a summary of the chapter. Okay, so I'm going to give you this whole chapter, which is about unlawful sexual relations. And you guys can tell me which of these things you think we should do. So here we go. No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. Yeah, that's probably a good one to stick with. Do not have sexual relations with your mother. Probably should stick with that too. How about your father's wife? So I'm assuming it's a second wife or not your mother's, but yeah, something like that. How about your sister? No, probably shouldn't be doing that either. Your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. Okay, yeah, no, I think we'll stick with it. Keep that one. Your aunt, your daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law, a woman and her daughter. So it's a threesome in particular, I guess. But yeah, none of those seem like those are good ideas to me. And then it says, do not have sexual relationships with a man as one does with a woman. That is an abomination. So that's the summary of the chapter. I don't feel bad in telling people, yeah, let's stick with those. Because I mean, why is any of that stuff a good idea? And so why would lying with a man be an exception to all the other sexual prohibitions that are given in that chapter? So anyway, I don't spend tons of time on that, but if ever it comes up that Levitican laws are disbanded, take a look at all the sexual prohibitions. So you know what? They're all actually still pretty current, whether you like it or not.
The first one was a fairly general one about close relative.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure if it's Australia or which countries it is, but you can get pretty close in terms of being allowed legally in some countries.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like cousins, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that sort of thing. Yeah, first cousins,
Right.
that sort of thing. In some countries, it's perfectly legal.
Yeah, but legal doesn't mean it's a good idea.
No, that's true. But I just bringing it up.
Yeah, but you look at this list here, you know, when it says close relative, and then it goes to the list, you know, mother, father's wife, sister, you know, your son's daughter, your daughter, such a granddaughter, right? I mean, that's closer than a cousin.
So you think that the ones below that line are the definition of the close relatives as opposed to?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm not sure I'm willing to go that far with it because it's not, doesn't say that, but I can see that interpretation. So anyway, yeah, there's definitely a closeness here that's beyond just a cousin.
It does seem to be all male oriented.
Yeah, yeah.
Daughters or mothers.
Yeah, right.
Wives. But
Yes.
then probably in that culture, that's what it was.
Correct.
And a lot of other cultures.
Yep. So yeah, not exactly a great list.
They give me the heebie-jeebies in a way. So most of those examples there.
As they should.
Yeah.
As they should.
Well, it would be interesting that the 75% of them are ones that give us the heebie-jeebies, then why would we not include the rest of the list?
Well, that's been a point of conversation these days. We're like, as a kid, the idea of being with a guy was giving me the heebie-jeebies, and now today in this world, people going, oh, that's fine, it's just like they've been desensitized to it all because they keep throwing it on TV and whatnot. So I think it's supposed to give us the heebie-jeebies myself. All right, well, we rolled through that pretty quick. Good. So this is the next one's more difficult, and I think is a bit more of an intellectual exercise. Are people born this way? Are people? That's I think is a lot of people's argument. Oh, well, I know so and so, and they were always a little fruity, right? They're always this way. No surprise when so and so came out of the closet.
Well, there was an example that was brought up in the last class when somebody that Margaret and I know of, he says he was born that way. And
No, we did not say that.
didn't he? Well,
He said in his ancestries he had it. So I don't think he was feeling he
But
was
he-
stuck in as being that one, but he had
but he
tendencies.
tried and tried and tried to get on top of a girl, and he couldn't do it.
No,
No.
I don't think you're saying that.
Oh, well.
There's never an end to these things. People can keep trying.
Mm.
I didn't get that impression.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
It was a
whether that example is correct, there are definitely people who make that claim.
Absolutely.
yeah.
For sure. And I think this kind of gets back to the whole idea of, well, salvation comes through the Lord. And what paths are they using for their curing, if you will. But the argument people will say is from scripture that they're born this way and therefore this should be okay, is they'll take this quote from Matthew and say, this is Jesus' words saying there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. One who can accept this should accept it.
I don't remember reading that before.
Yeah. So do you know what a eunuch is?
Yeah.
306.
Castrated?
Yeah, castrated male.
And technically that means no testicles, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so if you do a little bit of research on a eunuch in ancient times, comes back and says that this was done to men to make them less threatening to servants of a royal court, where physical access to the ruler would wield great influence, and to work as guards and servants in harems or other women's quarters, and as chamberlains to kings. So if you don't want your women to be having sexual relations with the guards, well, you make the guards neutered, and therefore you don't have the problem. I guess that's how it goes. So
I read something the other day that says that they're going to include that in the LGBTQI, etc.
Oh.
Now there's a need for you.
oh, really? I hadn't heard that one.
So what was the last bit you said?
It's now a need for eunuch in that alphabet. And
The LGBTQIA, whatever.
Yeah.
everyone- Huh, no, I hadn't seen that one.
or an argument for it.
Right.
Right. So the idea here, this is the argument as I've seen it written out. Jesus describes three groups of people, none of whom, for different reasons, can align themselves with the divine plan for marriage, right? A eunuch can't get married. People born with congenital reproductive systems deficiencies, people who were castrated or had their genitals damaged by disease or physical trauma, and people who choose either celibacy or castration for themselves, believing it to be a pious move. Some say this is the model of born, made, and chosen, and overlaps very well with what we see in the variety of experiences of people identifying as gay. So the idea, if somebody's born that way, they have no choice but to follow that path. That's the argument being made. But I know that there are rare instances where people have mutilated genitalia on birth, or they have both, or, there are certainly rare circumstances that do happen. But I don't think that's really the argument that we're making in this kind of a presentation. It's not about the rare circumstance where somebody has some sort of physical deformity. The idea we're looking at here is the people who have this thought in their head or this lust of the body towards a member of the same sex, and there's a mental choice being made. Their biology is as it should be.
What about the sort of tendency?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that in a minute. Yeah. And so, but what these guys do with this eunuch idea is saying, hey, the experience of sexuality varies throughout human existence. And they say that generally male sexuality is described as being more active, whereas female is described as being more receptive. It says as people age, their sexual desire can wane. And in married couples, the regard for sex can vary within the couple, which of course can cause challenges. So the idea is that, hey, sexuality has a wide range of experiences for people. Why wouldn't same-sex drive be a part of that variation? That's the argument. And this is what Ralph was just saying. Well, so are we born this way with tendencies, right? This is what TCR says: from the day we are born, we have an inclination towards evils of every kind. Nevertheless, unlike animals, we are born with inner levels of the mind that are spiritual. We are born for heaven. Because our earthly or outer self is a hell in miniature, as just noted, it follows that heaven cannot be planted in that hell must be moved out of the way. There are heaps of passages that say the same thing. We have this inclination towards hell. We have this desire towards hell. We pant, we long, we crave for hell. But unlike animals, we have this ability to rise above it. And that's the whole human experience, right? You long for this, and you need to rise yourself up. So yeah, I mean, are people born with a desire of same-sex attraction? Yeah, I don't doubt that. I just have an issue that that's what they are destined to be then. And I feel like what's happening in culture is, I watch a movie with, the good-looking lead actor, and I say, oh, he's a good-looking guy, and people turn that into, oh, well, there you are, you're same-sex attracted, you're bisexual, or it's like, what? Well, no. That seems to be the way things are going these days. Oh, well, you thought a guy's attractive. No. That's not how it works. You can't make everybody that way. But this is the whole point of life, right? Unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. So sure, you might have these sinful inclinations towards the same-sex attraction or bisexual attraction or whatever it is, but the point of our life is regeneration. It's to be born again. It's this disposing of the old will into the creation, or allowing in of a new will. So I think where this becomes difficult is lots of society isn't new church or Christian or even really spiritual. So in one sense, you can say, yeah, well, this guy who I know was born with this inclination, he doesn't know what to do with it, right? So he keeps on running with it, and I might live a morally fine life, but it doesn't mean that's that sexual activity is what God's plan is for him. But he doesn't know any better because he doesn't have the teachings. And so it does create problems. And I guess this to me goes back to that opening few verses from Leviticus, right? Lord says, hey, don't be like the Egyptians, don't be like the Canaanites, don't be like these people you've just left. I'm calling you out to be something different. And I think this is another one of those instances where, yes, you know, in the new church, we're being held to a higher standard because we have access to the truth.
This is where I feel like that argument falls apart when people disagree about what is evil and what's not evil, or whether the act is evil. Like, you're saying how sure we can be born with it, and you know, all kinds of inclinations towards all kinds of evils, and yet if people don't believe it's evil, then they see no reason to look for it.
That's kind of why we're looking at this and saying, well, this isn't a good thing. That's what the whole, yeah. So anyway, the next kind of argument that goes with this is, well, all right, they have the inclination. Are they unable to change? I had one person who was a well-read in the writings say to me, oh, well, maybe this is a case of mental illness. You know, they can't change from it. You know, he's acknowledging that, okay, people should get married. The Lord's plan is for heterosexual marriages. But I'm going to give you a couple snippets of what he's getting at here. That saying, all right, there's mental illness. Does same-sex attraction qualify as mental illness? It says, this is from Divine Providence. Many states lack freedom and rationality, but in general, they can be assigned to the following categories: states of fear, emergency, mental illness, serious physical illness, ignorance, and intellectual blindness. The reason no one is reformed in a state of mental illness is that mental illness deprives us of the rationality and therefore of the freedom to act rationally. The mind is sick and not healthy, and while a healthy mind is rational, a sick one is not. The illnesses are things like depression, imagined or illusory guilt, various kinds of hallucinations, mental anguish brought on by misfortunes, and mental anxiety and pain brought on by physical disorders. These are sometimes thought of as temptations, but they are not. Real temptations focus on spiritual issues, and during them, the mind is in possession of its skills. The states I am talking about focus on earthly issues, and during them, the mind goes mad. The same holds true for people who renounce the world and all its dealings and devote themselves totally to the thoughts of God and heaven and salvation. But there's more in this elsewhere. The result is that if people like this have not been reformed before their illness, then afterwards, if they do die, they are the same kind of people they were before the illness. This means that it was pointless to think that we can repent or accept any faith while we are seriously ill, because there's no trace of action involved in our repentance, no trace of caring in our faith. Thus, both our repentance and our faith are all talk and no heart. So, I guess the idea here is that mostly in this idea of they're deprived of their rationality. That's what they're seeing this same-sex urge is deprivation of rationality, and therefore they can't change out of it. And I don't know. I suppose it's possible. I mean, it seems to be this push that sexual sins are things that are immutable, that we can't change from them. You know, oh, I have this attraction and therefore that's just who I am. You should just accept me that way. And I have a hard time with it, because if we start saying it's a mental illness, it's just a way of saying we don't have to struggle against this thing. And why is that any different than any other sin? Like, okay, well, some people have a tendency to be a jerk, right? Some people are just, they're mean. Some people, they steal things. Some people have a tendency towards just regular old standard adultery, not same-sex adultery, but like just regular old stuff. Like, so I accept that certain people have that drive, but why is it that if the same-sex drive that we shouldn't be fighting against it versus all this other stuff we should? I mean, this is all the academic side of things that we're talking about so far, but like the pastoral side of me, knows stories kind of like what Owen was alluding to, where somebody has been dealing with this issue, they've been fighting against it. I've heard stories of people who have told me firsthand that they were abused, and ever since their abuse, they've had these same-sex attractions or, gender stuff in general. And when I hear their stories, I go, well, kind of understand why they have those feelings. And as I've talked to more pastors who've dealt with particularly younger people who are same-sex attracted, I mean, this is a real deal. The trauma that happens in people's life is there all the time in same-sex attracted kids. I mean, it just is. So when this idea is, oh, they have an inclination, yep, I buy that. Unable to regenerate? I mean, if you think of it in terms of trauma, you can kind of see that, yeah, this would be difficult to change. I have a hard time with impossible. I can see where it might be a lifelong struggle. Sure. So I don't know. I don't like calling it a mental illness. I feel like you put it into that category, you have stripped somebody of their personal control. And I don't think that's what the Lord says to us. I feel like he says to us that all things are possible through him. And that's the direction we should be going, as opposed to rolling over and dying and saying, oh, I have no control, right? So all this academic stuff saying, hey, the Lord says this isn't good, to me is clear. The arguments that we're seeing here so far about, oh, it's Old Testament law, we don't have to do that anymore. Oh, it's, born this way. I mean, these are all people who are trying in a compassionate way, hopefully, to deal with somebody who's struggling. And what's the easiest way to deal with somebody who's struggling? Just tell them, hey, they're fine the way they are, right? That's the easy thing, but it's not necessarily the right answer.
Is an inclination the same thing as what they call an orientation?
I don't know. The inclination in the writings is, to me, a term used versus orientation isn't. So it's hard to kind of compare the two, but it's probably similar. So another argument we run into is this idea that love is love. we were out, this is a few months ago. I guess I was back in the States, because I saw this girl wearing one of these spaghetti strap tops, and on the back of her shoulders there's this rainbow tattoo. It says love is love on the back, and I was like, oh. I know what that message is, and it's just not true. It's just not true. And the basic, most obvious answer to that is there are plenty of loves that are not good, right? You can love evil, you can love self, you can love power. There are plenty of loves that aren't good, and loves that we are born with, and loves that are not good but feel good, right?
Of course, they feel good, that's all, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, have you ever in a fit of anger just given somebody a piece of your mind? You know, rah, rah, rah. Maybe Ralph hasn't done it. Right, let them have it, and you go, "Boy, that felt good." Well, doesn't mean it was good, but yeah. So the teaching in the writings is that evils hide themselves, and that we don't see them, and they feel good, and so we don't recognize it as evil. That's part of the trick. So I want to give you this this couple of quotes here. It says, "Indeed, self-love is so abominable that when the restraints placed upon it are lifted, that is, when it is given the opportunity to do whatever it pleases, then even with those who belong to the lowest sort, it rushes with such urgency that it desires not only to exercise dominion over those nearest to it and over those close by, but also over the universe and even over the supreme divine being himself. Man is not indeed aware of this because he is held back by restraints he knows little about. But to the extent these restraints, as has been stated, are removed, he very rapidly does the same. This I have been given to know from much experience in the next life. Because these things lie concealed within self-love, people governed by self-love and not endowed with the restraints of conscience, more than all the others, hate the Lord, and thus hate all the truths of faith, since these are the very laws of order in the Lord's kingdom. Such people dislike these laws so much as to loathe them, and this also shows itself openly in the next life. This love is also the head of the serpent, which is the seed of the woman, that is, the Lord treads down, regarding which we see in volume 1, number 257. So, the main point is showing you that we desire evil love, it's concealed, but I don't know about you guys, when I read this part about, people governed by self-love hate the Lord, they hate the truths, and they hate the laws of order, and they loathe it. I think about some people these days who are very militantly anti-religion. And what are they doing? Well, they're hating God, they're hating the laws of order, and they're showing it openly. This continues, the same quote continues, it says, "But self-love does not always present itself outwardly in arrogance and pride, for sometimes such people are able to regard the neighbor with charity." Oh yeah, they act so nice, right? Some people are born with this outwardly charitable disposition, while others acquire it during childhood years. But after this, it is subdued, though the outward disposition does still remain. But those governed by self-love are such as to despise others and regard them as nothing in comparison with themselves. Nor do they have any concern whatever for the common good, unless this common good exists for their benefit. They benefit, they themselves being, so to speak, the common good. This applies especially to those who hate and persecute everyone who does not show them favor or serve them. As far as possible, they rob such persons of possessions, honor, reputation, and even life. Let those who behave intentionally in these ways realize that with them, preeminently self-love is present. So, this is going to sound harsh, but this is what I see coming out of the LGBT community towards the people who don't support them, right? If you don't say that this is good, guess what? This applies. They hate, they persecute. Everyone does not show them favor and serve them, right? Oh yeah, you're going to get Twitter mobbed if you post anything against them online. So I find this interesting because you can't see at the bottom there, but this is from AC 2219. And 2219 is in reference to no other story but Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, the story that has what? The homosexuality in it. But what's the internal sense of that story? Internal sense of that story is about love of self. I mean, and when you get down to it, what is homosexuality? It's loving, something of the same. It's not necessarily the self, but it's not loving something of the opposite sex. I mean, to me, there's just this correspondential tie-in that feels like this all wraps together. And when this passage says, some people are born with this outwardly charitable disposition. I mean, look, I've known gay people who seem quite nice, but boy, if you rile them up, they go off. So I think what this is describing is that life where there's this undercurrent of self-love. Is that put onto them through some childhood trauma? Evil is contagious kind of thing. I don't know how the mechanics of it work, but it does seem to say to me that there's something real going on there.
If anybody says something, just in a general way, anyone can get riled up if feel like they're being attacked. So I want to let you finish.
I'm done with that passage, but
so I'm not sure anyway. I'm just wondering where you're going with this. So I'll keep listening.
Get those bakers and florists and that have been taken to court over this sort of thing. Often people that have actually supported and been friends to these people, just because they won't accept something, they completely ruin their lives. I know other people can do that too, but
yeah,
you see this coming out.
Yeah, there seems to be an extremism with it. Like, yeah, Margaret, you're right. People do get upset when they're attacked, confronted, whatever, stuff like that. But there just seems to be a level of destroying somebody's life that is present with this stuff that isn't present elsewhere. You and I can disagree on something, and at the end of the day, we don't hate each other. And it feels
you can't say that all gay people are like
no, I'm not.
but
but
I'm sure
I,
there's an element there.
But if you look at the larger scope of this community, that is what happens. Oh, you disagree with us, we're going to ruin your life. We're going to get you fired. You said something that we construed as bigotry or hatred or whatever, and there's hate laws and stuff that's making a protected special class. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here that is above and beyond just, hey, we disagree, I don't want to be around you. It's about destruction of life, and there's laws being put in place or attempted to be put in place that, oh, if you try to teach your kid not to be gay, you're going to lose your parental rights. I mean,
I know there is.
So I mean, there's something more than just respectful disagreement. So, and I kind of look at this passage and I think, well, is this what's going on there? That deep seated in this, there is this love of self. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Along the same lines, it says, talking about the delight, it says that these delights of conjugal love and licentious love, so right, both, are thus opposed to each other is not at all apparent. It's not apparent because the delight of an evil love outwardly counterfeits the delight of a good love. Inwardly, however, the delight of an evil love consists of nothing but evil lusts, evil itself being a conglomerate, mass, or pile of such lusts. Whereas the delight of good love consists of countless good affections, good itself being, so to speak, a cluster of such affections united together. This mass of the one and cluster of the other are not felt by a person except as the same delight. And because the delight arising from evil outwardly counterfeits the delight arising from good, as said, therefore the delight in adultery is not felt except as the delight in marriage. But after death, when everyone puts aside external appearances and internal realities are laid bare, it then becomes evident to the sense that the evil of adultery is a mass of evil lusts, and that the good of marriage is a cluster of good affections, and thus that they are altogether opposed to each other. And I think this is really important. The delight in adultery is not felt except as the delight in marriage. That feels the same. It feels good. Doesn't mean it is good. And I think this is a fundamental problem why people struggle with this, because it feels good. The reason why evils are enticing and deceptive is that all evils spring from self-love and a love of the world. And self-love and love of the world are born together within a person. These are the source of what the person feels as the delight of his life right from when he is first born. Indeed, the life that it comes from them. Those loves, therefore, like the hidden currents in a river, are constantly drawing the person's thought and will away from the Lord and to self. We often talk about the stream of providence, right? Guiding us to heaven. There's apparently a stream drawing our mind towards hell as well. At this time, reasonings based on the illusions of the senses are especially predominant, and also the literal sense of the word wrongly explained and used. So, point being, there are lots of loves that aren't good, and we can't decide what's good based just on what feels good. And I think that's a common thing today, where we say, oh, well, this feels good, it must be good. How can something so good, feel so good, be so wrong, kind of line you hear in the songs. It's from a long time ago, but nevertheless, this is an argument used. It feels good, it must be good, but that's not what the writings say. This is what I've been looking forward to. They're not hurting anybody, because this is a one I run into a lot. So the basic idea on this is evil is contagious, and we see this in true Christian religion. It's very clear. Interaction with evil people has a contagious effect. If you're like with thieves, you become like them. If you're like adulterous people, you're like them. You'd be like a pirate, you're like them, right? Whatever you think of, nothing of doing these things as the evil spreads around. And just noting here that the number of people identifying as LGBT in the US has doubled in the last 7 years. And what I also think of is that there's this high degree of unhappiness reported by LGBT people, right? The high rates of suicide, the violence, the promiscuity. There are lots of unhappy characteristics of that group. And so I struggle with the rationality of not harming somebody, because guess what? If we all go around saying this is a good idea, you're spreading a contagion, right? You're spreading this, and what are you doing? Well, you're telling them to enter. It's okay to enter a life. It's going to make them miserable. The funny thing is, like, as a parent, I enjoy telling kids, yeah, go ahead, do it that way. That's not going to work out well for you. Give it a shot. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way. Well, you think, driving at night with your headlights off is a good idea? Yeah, you know what? Well, no, you wouldn't do that, because that might actually hurt somebody else. But let them make some mistakes.
I think eating all that chocolate's good.
Yeah, there you go. That's a better example. Yeah, have all the ice cream you want. Go for it. Get sick. But it doesn't work, right? They are harming themselves. In spiritual experiences, Swedenborg writes, it says, in the other life, those who are sinners of sodomy in their lifetime had believed nothing about life after death, the existence of hell and heaven, but they are entirely like wild animals and would therefore die. Therefore, they have nothing of understanding, even though they are able to reason. In the other life, they are treated very miserably, being punished by hellish torments that are so dreadful that they can hardly be told. So it's not a pleasant picture, right? And moreover, they inhabit the region of the tail, where the feces are, because they are manure and dwell in outhouses. So, you know, they're not violently necessarily harming anybody else, right? You're not punching people in the face, right? That's so they say, oh, they're not harming anybody. But if you look at this, this world from the Lord's perspective, now, if you're doing things that are harming yourself, the Lord says, well, you're somebody. You are harming somebody. You're harming yourself. And, you know, if somebody gets out a knife and starts cutting themselves and does physical self-harm, we say, no, self-harm is bad. We don't say this is good. So why are we encouraging a life that only has bad outcomes or has a high probability of bad outcomes? Because even if they manage to get through this life seemingly okay, fastation isn't fun. Fastation isn't fun. You know, you still have to learn how to get rid of that if you're going to enter into heaven. This is another one about vastations, not about, you know, gay people, but just saying that they have to undergo hellish torments, as I was told regarding Judas the betrayer. So Judas had to go through hellish torments, sounds like, to get himself straightened out, which the writings indicate he did, but it's not a fun process. Not a fun process. So I guess my point is, I think this idea that they're not harming themselves or anybody else, just I don't think that's actually true. But this is the last section I want to get on, and this is the role of conscience. I feel like this is where we actually have something to really chew on. So this first slide is just a kind of setting up where I'm going. From Could You to Love. Adulteries of the third degree are adulteries of the reason, which are committed by people who intellectually persuade themselves they are not sinful evils. All right. And basically what you can see in that second paragraph there is the case I'm showing you is that the destruction of conscience is one of the worst things. That's how hell gets you, right? You persuade yourself it's not bad. And it gets to the next thing here along the same lines, talking about sirens, not about homosexuality, but sirens, right? And what do? I have it underlined in the middle there. They study nothing more than to destroy the conscience. And when it is destroyed, they get possession of the men's interiors. Excuse me, and even obsess the men, though they are ignorant of it. Goes on talking about how, yes, you know, this obsession is still possible today. And the idea here is that as our conscience is destroyed, hell gets possession of us. So what I feel like is happening in culture is the destruction of our conscience around LGBT behaviors. You know, it used to be an issue of conscience. Oh, I shouldn't admit to this. I shouldn't do this. I'm doing this anyway. But at least there was a conscience to it. And now you not only have to tolerate it, you have to condone it. This is a good thing that somebody's doing. It's good they came out, you know, that kind of stuff. And this is destruction of conscience, which, as I look in the previous one, you know, it ends you in the worst place. Because you don't have a conscience, right? So that's what I'm setting up. Destruction of conscience ends you into a very bad place. But here's the other side. This is regarding eating the flesh of animals, because it says regarded in itself is something profane. But, through the second paragraph, in the process of time, when men began to be as fierce as wild beasts, and even fiercer, they then for the first time began to kill animals and eat their flesh. And because such was humanity's nature, it was permitted them to do this and is still permitted to this day. And so far as they do it from conscience. So far it is lawful for them, since their conscience is formed of all they suppose to be true and thus lawful. No one therefore is at this day condemned because of eating flesh. So the case I've heard made is like, well, hey, if we all think it's okay, then it is okay. Therefore, LGBT people have nothing to fear because they're doing this with a clear conscience. To the extent we keep their conscience clean, they're going to be fine because, hey, you know, eating meat's profane, but if you have a clean conscience about it, then it's okay. See the mess here? So, because I'm not providing you necessarily an answer on this because I'm still a little churning on this myself, because we just saw destruction of conscience does not end well. But that seems to be what has happened in this case. So it does become a bit of a mess. This next few slides kind of stay on this topic of how do we deal with this and the role of conscience, all right? This is from the end of Conjugal Love, right? So we just did Conjugal Love back half class. And I think we end with some of this talk where he says, all these things are bad, right? And then there's last few pages of the book, it says, oh, and by the way, don't judge because you don't know the internal circumstances to the person. And I find that a very powerful message, especially considering where he placed it, right? All this stuff is bad, gonna end you in hell. But there's this big hanging but at the end. So let's read this. To this I will add the following. It is said in the church that no one can fulfill the law, and the less so since anyone who sins against one commandment of the Decalogue sins against them all. But this conventional maxim is not as it sounds, for it is to be understood in this way, that anyone who purposely or deliberately acts against one commandment acts against the rest. Since to act purposefully or deliberately is to deny altogether that the action is a sin. And anyone who denies the existence of sin regards it as nothing if he acts against the rest of the commandments. Who does not know that one who's an adulterer is not on that account a murderer, a thief, a false witness, nor wills to be, but one who's a purposeful and deliberate adulterer? Such a one regards everything having to do with religion as nothing, including therefore murder, theft, and false witness. And if he refrains from them, he does not do so because they are sins, but because he fears the law and damage to his reputation. It may be seen above in the narrative accounts that purposeful and deliberate adulterers account the sacred tenets of the church and religion as nothing. The case is that the same if anyone acts purposefully or deliberately against any other commandment of the Decalogue, namely that he acts also against the rest because he does not regard anything as a sin. All right. So there's this tension, like, okay, it's like you can commit adultery, but not be an adulterer, right? I kind of know this to be true, right? You know, that there are people who get into a bad situation, they get drunk or they let themselves flirt too much with somebody, and all of a sudden adultery happens, but they regret it. Oh, geez, what have I done? Is that person an adulterer? No, they committed adultery, but they're not an adulterer. Why is the distinction? Because, well, they regret it. They regard this as sinful. Okay, I shouldn't do all these things. But to the extent that your conscience allows these things and says, oh, I don't have to listen to all these rules, well, then you start getting yourself in trouble. It continues. And I think this is the key. Something similar is true in the case of people who are in a state of good from the Lord. If they, from their will and intellect, or purposefully and deliberately refrain from one evil because it is a sin, they refrain from them all. And this still more if they refrain from several. For as soon as anyone purposefully or deliberately refrains from some evil because it is a sin, he is kept by the Lord in a purpose to refrain from the rest. Consequently, if he then does evil unwittingly or under the sway of some overwhelming lust of the body, still it is not imputed to him, because he did not purpose it to himself, nor does he defend it in himself. I think that's key. Nor does he defend it in himself. So like, Owen's earlier example of a guy who was in these behaviors and was fighting it. I mean, to me, that sounds like somebody who's not defending it in themselves. If you're actively, pushing against it, but even failing and you succumb, the writings are saying, you know what? That's not imputed to him because you're not willing to do it. You're not choosing it in your mind. And I think that's the big piece of it in all of this is the Lord cares about our thoughts and our intentions. And so to the extent that we get into these behaviors and let our conscience be destroyed about it and just say, this is great, I think we get ourselves in trouble. Because why? We are now defending it in ourselves. So if we have a conscience about it, I think we're in a better place than if we don't. Says a person comes into this purpose if he examines himself once or twice a year and repents of the evil that he finds himself. Not so one who never examines themselves. So it's important to have the teaching out there that this isn't good, even if they fail to actually put that into practice, right? It's better to say, this is a bad thing, I shouldn't do it, but there's this overwhelming lust of the body. This is what I'm attracted to. I can't control it. Okay. You didn't purpose to do it, and you don't defend it. And the same thing, continuing in the back, it says, licentious love is imputed, namely not in accordance with the deeds, such as they appear in the outward respects before men, but such as they appear in their inner respects before the Lord, and from him above before the angels, which depends on the nature of the person's will and understanding in the deeds. There are various circumstances in the world which mitigate and excuse offenses, child abuse, environmental things, whatever, right? And also which aggravate and worsen them. Even so, however, imputations after death are not made in accordance with circumstances that outwardly surround the deed, but in accordance with the internal circumstances of the mind. So I feel like there's a fair bit of compassion being laid out there for us. Similarly, when a person is being regenerated, he is sent into battles against falsities. During these, the Lord maintains him in truth, but in what he has convinced himself to be the truth. Right? What you believe doesn't actually have to be the truth. It just has to be what you think is the truth. So I think this goes back to this idea of perpetual growth and change. You have to always be open and seeking the truth, right? That's key to a regenerative person's life, is seeking the truth. If you've convinced yourself that whatever you're doing is just fine, you're not really seeking the truth, but you're just rolling with it. This number here at the end, this is kind of the summary for me as far as all LGBT stuff. It's Law 55. Talked about it before, right? There's love between men, love between women, and there's love of a man for a woman and love of the woman for the man. These are completely different from each other, right? The loves, namely between the love between two men, love between two women, do not enter deeply into their hearts, but remain outside and only touch. Thus, these loves do not unite the two of them interiorly. That's that fourth paragraph down. That's key. As far as the writing is concerned, that is key. Those loves don't unite them interiorly, therefore it's not a marriage love. It is different. So if you look at the big picture here, right, what are the arguments you will make in favor of same-sex relations? Well, that it's you're born this way, and therefore you're being cruel if you tell them that they shouldn't do that, right? But the church says homosexuality is a form of adultery because it's an unlawful coupling, and that doesn't unite the souls of people, and therefore it doesn't exist in heaven. If it doesn't exist in heaven, it can't be good, right? It can't be good. And of course, you get the big star caveat at the end, which is to say, well, it doesn't mean that homosexual can't go to heaven, right? Maybe your friends who's a homosexual goes through the vastation process and they end up in heaven, and that may all be true. But you won't find homosexual behaviors in heaven, even if you find people who were homosexual practitioners here. So I throw this in at the end because it's like, well, people often think, well, okay, if a homosexual can go to heaven, then I don't have to try to amend the behavior now. I'll just keep on keeping on. But there's a certain element to that of hoping that the person gets sorted out in the vastation process. It's not a very good strategy to get yourself to heaven to hope that this will get sorted out in the next life and I'll end up on the good side of the ledger. If heaven is our goal, hoping that we get there isn't a good strategy. The strategy is repentance. That's an effective strategy. Just hoping you'll get there isn't a good one. Other things I've thought of in relation to this, just to wrap it up, are I know that a lot of people don't want to hear this message that homosexuality is not a great thing and should be condoned. But, there's Proverbs here. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end, you'll be counted among the wise. And I feel like that's kind of what's being asked of us, to be faithful, and even if we're telling people they don't want to hear, it is our job. I'm not saying to go around and just start picking out random strangers and tell them that they're going to hell, but if somebody is asking for our opinion on these things, I think we are wise to tell them what the Lord says about it. We are kind of the watchman, right? Made you the watchman, and that's our job, to call out the evils when we see them. The one that comes to me all the time is if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes the life of one of them, that man will be taken away because of his sin. I will hold the watchman accountable for his blood. And this is the last one. This is from end of TCR. 847 is like almost the last number. Surely everyone knows, the angel said, that the delights involved in marriage love are greater than the delights of any other type of love. People do not in fact know this, I said. And the reason is they have not turned to the Lord. They have not abstained from the lusts of the flesh. I have my doubts, I added, that people in the world today are willing to believe that this love is intrinsically spiritual and is a result of their religious practice. They are unlikely to be They are likely to be resistant to this idea because they think of marriage love as something that relates to the body alone. Because the quality of this love depends on our religious practice. It is spiritual among spiritual people, earthly among earthly people, and merely carnal among adulterous people. So I think that kind of makes the case that if we don't abstain from lust of the flesh, we fail to see marriage and sexual relations as anything other than a bodily thing, a carnal thing. We become more animalistic. And Swedenborg is telling us, look, marriage is something more than just the body. It's something more. It's spiritual among spiritual people. I'm pretty sure that's where I ended it. Yes. So there you have it.
So hearkening back to your, a few slides ago, don't go preaching to strangers on the street kind of thing, and do speak the truth when asked.
Right.
So where's the in between when it's somebody that you know well, but who's not asking? Do we have a duty? Like for context, my sister's lesbian. She's been in a very long-term relationship and they're very happy and, all is well. Each of us knows where the other stands on this. So it would not be like she grew up in the new church as well and has chosen this lifestyle. And I'm not inclined to pick a battle with her because I think she knows more or less, but I also think she hasn't done much study into it because she's quite happy with her lifestyle. And I don't want to rock the boat, but am I, as the watch person, doing her a disfavor by letting her do this?
No, look, so there are two things I'll say on that. One, I would be careful to be saying she's quite happy with her current life.
Well,
I know your sister,
okay,
and
right,
she does not come across as a happy person. She might be content,
okay,
she might be secure, but I think asserting somebody's happiness is
okay.
not
I guess what I could have said instead was she does not seem to be trying to change her behavior.
correct.
She's
And
comfortable in that lifestyle.
Correct. And therefore, because she's not seeking anything, I don't think you have a job or thing to say. Like she knows where you stand.
Mm,
And to me, that's as far as the requirement is. You've put it out there, she has access to you, you're not the only person in her life who has these teachings. To me, it's if somebody's asking,
right,
then say, yeah, no, this is bad. I feel and professionally, as a pastor, that's what I'm supposed to be teaching, that put it in sermons, newsletters, whatever, say, look, this is not a good behavior to do. And yet you have to couple that with the compassion of, hey, I know also how people get into these behaviors too. And so it's trying to not be, old school judgmental
sure.
fire and brimstone. But at the same time, this isn't taking you anywhere good.
Well, and that's just it, out of compassion for her welfare down the road, there's the part of me that wants to help her understand.
Right.
I don't think I can do that, and whatever, there's that small part of me that wants to help her because of the difficulty she might have investigating. Obviously, I don't know what her outcome will be, but if I could do something now that would help her, I would want to do that. But I don't know that there's.
Can't help somebody who won't help themselves.
Yeah.
That's just a general statement.
Right.
But you can help in treating her like a human being.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Which
this is the thing that
yeah.
for me that comes out of this is I've never tried to condone it or anything like that, but I have tried to understand how do I react to
Right.
people if
Right.
I meet somebody. How should I be feeling? How should I be thinking? And a lot of the quotes and things that keep popping up to answer that in my mind when I read the word or if I'm reading things is compassion.
Mhm.
It's truth's no good without, doctrine's no good if you don't live a life of goodness and kindness.
Yeah.
So I think picking, I feel for me, listening to this, very difficult to distinguish between the act and the person.
Mm.
And so, it comes up evil. This is an evil thing to do. And the tendency for me is just naturally to say, well, they're evil people. Then I think, no, we can't say that. We can't judge that. It's the act. So I think this is a real challenge to be able to, we've all got evils we're dealing with.
Right.
And you're picking one thing, I mean, I should say I would be
Yeah,
picking
yeah.
one thing that person has. And what else does that person do in their life?
Correct.
What good do they do in the world? How do they help other people?
Absolutely.
So that's good. You're attracted to the good in a person. So I feel I shouldn't be looking to that side. An angel turns their mind from that to look at for the good in the person. And I would do that in a way, I wouldn't be condoning it.
Right.
So if it ever came up in the conversation, my point would be, well, I don't believe that. I believe that is not going to make you happy, blah, blah, but
Right.
I suppose the whole point about all this for me is I've been struggling with it for a while. So how do I think about something? If I meet somebody
Right.
like this, how do I feel? And I think I've come to the conclusion that treat them like a human being.
Right.
Because it'd be very easy to just say, oh, that's where the hate comes in. This is where a lot of the hate crimes have come in because people kind of see the truth in it, but don't get past the fact that, well, if you're not having to deal with it yourself, how can you understand? So that doesn't mean you condone it.
So yeah, exactly. I agree with you 100% on that. And where I found my peace 15 years ago with my sister was remembering that the Lord wants us to love the good in the neighbor. And there is so much good in my sister and her partner both. They're beautiful people. They are so generous and loving. And that's how I interact with her. And so, as I said, we both know where each other stands on the homosexual issue, but the rest of our lives, we don't talk about it. It's comfortably put to bed. Each other sits on it, but the rest of our lives, we're very loving with each other and with everybody else. And yep, I absolutely agree that the Lord, above all else, does not want us to hate on people. He wants us to look for the good qualities in them. And yep, I agree with you.
And I believe that listening to teachings, I'm relating those to myself. And I'm not following that kind of life.
Right.
and so I'm not wanting to put myself above anybody else who might be doing that. That's a real balancing act, I think, this not judging.
Yes.
We're taught not to judge a person, but to judge them by their actions. And so,
And also, only the Lord can judge because He knows it.
that's right.
I think one thing we can be grateful for though is go back maybe just even 10 years. We've come full circle in a way because we're saying when we were at school, anybody who was gay, treated
Inhumanely.
yeah,
Derision.
and yeah, they were treated badly. And there were people that would go out and attack. They know places where they congregate and they'd attack them. Sometimes even people have been killed. Well, this is the opposite end of things.
That's right.
And that's been brought down a lot, you know,
Yep.
and we certainly want that.
Well, the
So
writings-
maybe in terms of trying to resolve it, the way we'd like to see it is, this is a necessary step along the way,
That's a good point.
and
It's like the writings say that evil has to come forward to be, and I mean, if it destroyed this society, I mean, that's what happened with the Roman Empire and other places, so it's, we don't know, we can't see the future, we don't know what the Lord, what will come out of it.
Right. Well,
But the acting in an evil way against an evil person doesn't dilute it. Because those people who are attacking and murdering, I mean, then they become murderers, so they're no better.
I mean, it's along what Owen was saying, I guess, is that I think about the self-destructive nature of evil, you know, that it eventually undoes itself. And so we don't have to act evilly against evil because it'll be its own destruction. And yet at the same time, we do have to stand up for principles and say, well, look, you know, be that shining light on the hill that says, hey, you know, there's a way out of the mess that you're in down there. You know, raise yourself higher, and you'll be better off.
Well, I think the thing that really brought it to head, maybe all of us, was this lawfulness of having a same-sex marriage, and we had to actually vote. So that's when I think you do have to put your principles into practice, because, that was a tricky kind of thing. So it just doesn't make sense. How can you have, because you can't have a human race, if everybody was same sex, you wouldn't have a human race. So,
Yeah, and I saw in that vote a lot of people wanting to be just like other nations, right? You know, they wanted to be like everybody else, and that's not the calling.
Well, I'm hearing what you were just saying a minute ago too about, it feels like, we're called to be defensive but not offensive about it, you know, like stand up for the Lord's truths, but not be offensive, not go on the offensive preaching.
but it's almost come the other way, full force, and if you do stand up, you're kind of, whoa, as you pointed out in some of the things there that,
so where is the issue in the church now? There's this petition going around and so on.
and it's a committee dealing with it, isn't it?
Pete, I'm on the consistory, which is, you know, Pete's little committee of sounding board.
Oh, okay.
So Pete just sent out to us a first draft of his response letter. I think so it's close to being finished, and this letter will get published. It's pretty long, it's like 6 pages of a letter, so
That can be an issue, isn't it, when you're too much to read?
yeah.
I feel a bit sorry for him, because it all blew up when he put that article in the Church Life, and it had the opposite effect of what it was hoping.
Yeah, he bless him, you know,
Yes.
he didn't believe others who told him this is a bad idea. But I think the good for him has been that he actually now really realizes the situation. I think it's been an eye-opening experience, because I get the sense he was in his, you know, those buses I think are born regenerate, and so like, you know, they just think everybody's so nice and wonderful and everything, and they're so nice that they think everybody else is that way, and therefore they don't understand. They just go, oh, well, if the word says this, then this is what we all do. So,
Those passages where you can prove that black's white and white's black,
Right.
and all that kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
just-
So it's
somebody's gonna come back and
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, Pete felt he was called to do it. He got his beating as a result, and now is a more enlightened bishop than he was before.
Well, as you said, some good will come from it.
So, I mean, this letter he's drafted up so far is a reflection of that experience, and, good for him, I guess. But I don't think it's going to resolve anything. I think he still has a bit of a delusion that he's going to publish this response and this whole issue is going to be settled. And it's like, yeah, I don't think so there, buddy. This is just way too contentious. And
It's probably only been settled, or possibly a split.
Yeah.
Some people. will-
yeah, well, and I wouldn't,
So who knows?
well, and it may not even be like a split in a certain terms of organizational split, but just people leaving.
Yeah,
You know.
Yeah.
That's possible. And
the convention might enjoy a boom.
but see, I've had that same thought, but you know what? The reality is most of the people who are clamoring for these changes aren't active participants in the GC anyway. The people went through that petition and like 75% of them aren't members of the GC in the first place.
Aren't members,
Correct.
but just some.
Yeah. And so then you have,
But there are some surprising names on
There are, yeah.
there are indeed.
And I think a lot of those are people who have
They are,
grandchildren or whatever,
Yeah,
and
and I
they're
think
just,
they're- they're trying to be fair.
yeah,
I think, I know what they're dealing with, because I've been the same way,
right, yep,
so.
there you.
Anywho, well, I'm gonna sign off this
Good.
Zoom, and that way, if anybody's on YouTube, I'm saying goodbye to you because I don't have YouTube open right now. So thanks for participating, and see you.